the United States and the occupants of your office historically have been the greatest defenders of a free press and of free speech.
And I think I am too. I want to be. I want to be. What you do is a very important thing. And I will tell you, I would love if I was just covered fairly.
But what do you see the role of the free press as? What is it that you think that the press does?
It describes and should describe what's accurately what's going on in anywhere it's covering, whether it's a nation or a state or a game or whatever is it. If it describes it accurately and fairly, it's a very, very important and beautiful thing.
Said the man who's told more than 8,000 lies. It's hard to argue, though, with that description he offered, although it loses most, if not all of its muster, when you consider who's saying it. That was Trump talking about a free press. At one point, according to the Times, even insisting that he didn't like the fact that foreign leaders were increasingly using the term fake news to justify suppressing independent scrutiny. Again, hard to argue with the sentiment until you consider what Trump said earlier the very same afternoon.
Did you talk to your intelligence chiefs today about the displeasure you had with their testimony?
I did, and they said that they were totally misquoted and they were totally, it was taken out of context. So what I do is I'd suggest that you call them. They said it was fake news, so which frankly
didn't surprise me. We just ran exactly what they said to Congress.
It didn't surprise me at all. But we're here to talk right now about China.
Joining us for this conversation, my Friday friend, the Rev. Al Sharpton, host of Politics Nation here on MSNBC and president of the National Action Network, New York Times columnist and MSNBC contributor Michelle Goldberg, and here with us in San Francisco, Republican strategist Tim Miller. Heidi Price-Bella is still here as well. Rev, let me start with you. I mean, this is, and I always come to you to explain the man to me. How does he say something? And I think I know the answer by now, but he's the person who's told more than 8,000 lies. He's the person who really rose to prominence in the Republican field by battling, by battering, by lying about the media day in and day out. And he sits there in polite company with the publisher of the New York Times and says, oh, what you do is a beautiful thing. It's delusional.
It is delusional, but it's typical Trump, because Trump has the whole, he has a long, let me put it this way, he has a long record of trying to say what he thinks people wants to hear, dismiss the past, and thinks that he can make you gullible in that moment, even if you're the publisher of the New York Times. I mean, he's sitting there as a guy who built his whole campaign, fake news, me against them, and I'm with you guys against them. They ignore you, they marginalize you, and then he sits there and says you're doing great. Like when he went over to visit the New York Times and less than 12 hours later castigating them. And I think that now this is beginning to run thin, because everybody's seeing that this guy will say anything to anyone. And I think that people have gotten very, very hip to that, as we would say.
Heidi Price-Bella, it strikes me that a man who gets in more lies than steps most days can sit there with a straight face and say these things about what he thinks is beautiful, that Maggie Haberman putting it to him. What in your view is a free press? What does a free press do? In the same interview, he makes it very clear what they do. They write one great story about a guy from Queens who becomes president. He wants to see himself, as he sees himself, reflected on the pages of the New York Times.
To me, that was actually one of the most telling parts of the interview, Nicole, when he said that because the New York Times is his hometown paper, they should essentially cut him a break and give him some positive press. That reflected, despite his earlier comments, a fundamental misunderstanding of what the role of the free press is, which is to hold power to account, and that he sits in the ultimate position of power, that it is to shine a light on cronyism and corruption. You didn't hear any words like that. So it kind of took back what he had previously said. But to your point about falsehoods, it is also potentially, just a projection, like the ultimate projection, because we have fact checkers. It is empirically true that the president does not tell the truth, and that we are catching him, in a rate of 50 to 60, whatever they are, untruths in a week or two. And so there's amount of projection to this. But I saw in that interview a continued almost reliance as well on the media, showing that even as he with one hand taunts reporters like Maggie, and specifically Maggie, on Twitter that just as easily and just as quickly he's willing to sit down and go into a room and talk nicely to them and play nicely, that in a certain sense it's all kind of just a game for him. And I think a lot of reporters who covered his campaign also felt like that too. I remember sitting in a green room early on in the campaign. I was covering the Hillary Clinton campaign, and a very prominent D.C. reporter sitting next to me took a call, and I was just shocked, Nicole, after covering campaigns, and you can appreciate this, that he would call reporters on his cell phone and speak directly to them, that he was that married to the idea of creating his own image.
Well, and he does it as president. I'm told by a pretty reliable source that he's often the person leaking meetings that take place in the West Wing, in the residence and whatnot. Michelle Goldberg, I want to ask you about something else he said in the Times. He describes being president as a loser. He says, quote, "I lost massive amounts of money doing this job. This is not the money. This is one of the great losers of all times. You know, fortunately, I don't need money. This is one of the great losers of all times." But they'll say that somebody from some country stayed at a hotel, and I'll say, yeah, but I lose. I mean, the numbers are incredible. This seems to me to blow up the idea that he's abandoned the idea of himself as some sort of businessman and sees himself as the head of state. He sees himself at all hours of all days as Trump, the businessman, Trump as head of Trump.org, who's sort of dabbling in politics as the president of the United States.
And if that was even a little bit true, it would be extremely easy for him to show that that was the case, right? If he didn't have something shameful and secretive hidden in his tax returns, he would release them like everybody else does. He would truly separate himself from the business if he wasn't interested in sort of profiting at every moment off this opportunity that he's been given. Then he wouldn't turn his hotels and his golf club and his, and Mar-a-Lago into basically adjuncts of his brand as the head of government, right? So I think, the thing that is so maddening and has been driving us all crazy for 2 years is that it's very unusual to have somebody lie to your face to this degree, right? The corruption is so open, it's so blatant, and he's just going to look you in the eye and tell you that it's not happening.
Yeah, I mean, Tim, look, this is where we are. This is where the point at which we've arrived, where yesterday he basically was asking us to not believe our eyes and ears, to not believe the televised live testimony of the heads of the intel agencies, and trying to chalk it up to fake news. It seems like maybe he's been confronted with the ceiling of all the things we're talking about, of the claims of fake news, and of sort of the pattern of lies. The ceiling is about 37%, where he stands.
Boy, I don't know if he's confronted with that. I think that he still believes that he can go into this campaign in 2020 and pull the wool over people's eyes. I mean, as was said earlier, look, this is a game for him. He knows that it's a game. That's what's so insidious about it. Like the lies that he's telling to these reporters, when he's off camera, he's joking with them behind the scenes about how it's working and about how the fake news thing is working. And this is also true to that point about him being the biggest loser. I wanted to chime in on that because how does he know that the Trump organization, this has been a big loser for them, right? He's supposed to have a firewall right now. And I think this firewall is a complete joke. He does not get pressed on that, and he gets wrapped around the axle on all these lies, and that's how it ties together, because he's lying so much about the supposed firewall between the Trump organization and his presidency, he doesn't even know anymore what he said, like what this fake firewall is. When it initially started, he supposedly had an ethics watchdog he was going to hire. He made up all of these, various things, and I think that if he knows that they're losing money, that actually makes the risk higher for the fact that there are conflicts, because he wants people to come go to his hotels.
It's a great point. He also lets it slip that he knows foreign leaders are staying at his hotel. Right. So someone's telling him that whoever it is, whatever foreign governments, I think there's been some reporting in the Times of the Post that the Saudis at different times have bought blocks of rooms. So it certainly seems to bolster the emoluments case.
For sure. And the D.C. hotel, from what I've heard, is doing exceptionally well. So if the Trump brand,
well, he knows who's staying there, you can see why.
Exactly. If his racism and the Trump brand and the negative Trump comments are hurting Trump's brand elsewhere, he needs to make up for it in places like Mar-a-Lago and in D.C. And the cost of the D.C. hotel rooms is huge. So, maybe there isn't a direct quid pro quo here, right. but if you can just kind of butter him up by saying, hey, I know you're losing money, and so we're going to buy these huge blocks of rooms at the Trump hotel, and you're a foreign country, that's a huge conflict. And it's such a great insider conflict. And remember the stink that was made over the Clinton Foundation.
Right.
While she was Secretary of State, that was a legitimate conflict of interest,
Right.
but at least that money was going to poor kids, right? That money was going to charity, to Haiti, right? This money's going into his pocket.
Hey there, I'm Chris Hayes from MSNBC. Thanks for watching MSNBC on YouTube. If you want to keep up to date with the videos we're putting out, you can click subscribe just below me, or click over on this list to see lots of other great videos.